We begin with the Maldives again. The diplomatic storm continues. Indian social media is still full of angry posts and hashtags. The Maldivian president is in China looking to boost ties with them. Yesterday we told you why this is a poor policy and how it could backfire. Tonight we look at the geopolitics of it. Why is China cultivating the Maldives? Meanwhile, there's tension brewing in the other end of Asia too. Again, courtesy China. There was a nationwide alert in Taiwan today. The fear of an attack from Beijing. We'll tell you what happened. In the Red Sea, the Houthi attacks are not ending. India has deployed 10 warships, planes, drones and marine commandos as it faces export losses of $30 billion. In France, they've got a new prime minister, the country's youngest and first openly gay PM. In Bhutan, they've just had an election and the biggest issue is jobs. 29% unemployment in a country that puts happiness above development. Ecuador has declared an emergency after the jailbreak of a famous drug lord. Germany is grappling with a farmers' protest. Norway wants to be the first country to start deep-sea mining. We'll tell you why it's controversial and why our libraries dying. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. The Israel-Hezbollah face-off escalates. The Iran-backed militant group strikes a command base in Israel. Hezbollah calls it a revenge attack. It comes after Israel killed one of its commanders in Lebanon and the deputy chief of Hamas. Russia remains defiant as Ukraine pounds Belgorod. Kremlin says it will do everything to hold the attacks on its border city. In Belgorod, hundreds have been evacuated and schools closed due to the constant shelling. Recently, there has been an increase in aerial strikes by both Ukraine and Russia. Kenya faces backlash over its visa-free entry policy. President William Ruto announced the move last month, but tourists say the new policy is confusing, making travel tougher and costlier. Visitors to Kenya still need to apply for an electronic travel authorization. Will European Union probe Microsoft's investments in OpenAI? Brussels says it will not let major players shut out competitors. The UK is also looking into Microsoft's partnership with the ChatGPT developer. The tech giant has pledged to invest $13 billion in OpenAI. South Korea bans dog meat trade. The law will come into force by 2027. Breeding, selling and slaughtering dogs for their meat will be prohibited. The law does not criminalize consumption though, but the measures will effectively end the centuries-old tradition. And is your bottled water safe? Not really, says a new study. An average bottle contains nearly 250,000 particles of nanoplastics. These tiny particles can end up in the bloodstream and pose significant health risks. You've heard about India out. It's the new Maldivian foreign policy, but turns out that's just one part. India out is just one part. There's a sequel as well, and that's China in. President Mohamed Muizzu is traveling through China. He's on a 5-day visit. Today, he was in the city of Fuzhou. It's a massive industrial hub in the Fujian province. There, he met Chinese investors. He urged them to pump money into the Maldives. Later, he will travel to Beijing. He's expected to meet President Xi Jinping and the Chinese premier. They will sign some key agreements on trade, tourism and infrastructure. But what's the larger picture here? Muizzu has already said India out. Without India, the Maldives needs an alternative. Enter China. Muizzu is hoping that China can be his top ally for investments, for trade and for crisis management. And his statements in China make that clear. Listen in.
The fact that I'm here in China on my first state visit is testament to the commitment of His Excellency President Xi Jinping and the people of China to the Maldives. We have no doubt that China will be our closest partner in development.
Let me repeat that. Muizzu wants China to be his closest partner in development, not a close partner, not one of the closest partners, but the closest partner. So his intention is quite clear. But two questions still remain. One, what's in it for China? And two, how will this affect the Maldives? Let's pull up the map first. The Maldives is a pretty small country, just 300 square kilometers of land. The population is just 500,000, but its location is very important. Below the Maldives is a massive underwater ridge. Think of it as a wall in the Indian Ocean. You can't sail through it. The only path is located to the north and south of the Maldives, just 2 passageways. And through here, a lot of goods pass. Look at the ship tracking map. You can see clusters of ships to the north and south of the Maldives. So it's prime real estate. Most of China's trade passes through here, especially oil imports from West Asia. They pass through here. So security is a top priority. Same for India. 50% of our trade passes through these sea lanes. Also 80% of energy imports, 80%. So what happens if China stations warships in the Maldives? Or worse, if China builds a military base in the Maldives? It can disrupt India's supplies. Now, I know this geography can be complicated, so think of it like this. The Indian Ocean is a very busy highway. The Maldives is like a toll booth. Whoever controls the booth controls the highway. It's as simple as that. We've already seen indications of this. In 2017, 3 Chinese warships visited the Maldives. In 2018, 11 Chinese vessels sailed into the East Indian Ocean, a fleet of destroyers and 1 frigate. And the timing was key because in 2018, the Maldives was engulfed in a political crisis. The president then was Abdullah Yameen, and he had declared an emergency. That's when the Chinese came. And throughout, they've had just one objective. Beijing's mission is one. It is strategic. To lure this old Indian ally Maldives to China's side. That's what they want. But how will that affect the Maldives? Because China's help is never free. It's actually a trap, a debt trap. And the Maldives cannot afford that. Let's look at some numbers. Mali is neck deep in loans. Total debt is almost 110% of the GDP. That's their debt, 110%. To put that in context, Sri Lanka's debt was 115% of its GDP at the end of 2022. So things are bad. The Maldives spends around $300 million to service its debt annually. That's interest plus repayment, $300 million every year. By 2026, it will reach $1 billion. Can Mali afford that? Well, not for long. Their foreign exchange reserves are falling. They dropped 16% in 2023, and a big reason for that is China. Beijing is the biggest lender to the Maldives. Again, I have numbers. Mali owes $1.3 billion to China. Saudi Arabia is second at $124 million. India is third at $123 million. I'll repeat that for you. 1.3 billion versus 123 million. That's the Chinese business model. That's what Mohamed Muizzu wants for the Maldives. It's a very risky mission, also a familiar one. Sri Lanka did the same under the Rajapaksas. Look where it landed them. In the end, India stood by Colombo. Beijing did not. Is that where the Maldives is heading? Maybe not yet. But multiple Maldivian politicians have lashed out at Muizzu. They have apologized to India. They have asked Muizzu to not do what he's doing, to apologize. So all is not lost. But it's important to keep the larger picture in mind, and the larger picture is not the social media outrage, it's not the 3 suspended ministers, it's not Lakshadweep versus Maldives either. It is the strategic battle between India and China. And speaking of strategic battles, there's another one that's heating up, Taiwan. The self-ruled island that China is obsessed about. Taiwan wants independence, China wants full control, and that's the core of the conflict. And it's back in focus because Taiwan is voting this week. They have a presidential election in 4 days from now. The result would determine their future and their relationship with China. So China is interfering in this election, and brazenly so. Today there was panic in Taiwan. Mobile phones started buzzing across the island. Everyone received a warning, and this is what the warning said. Air raid alert, missile fly over Taiwan airspace, be aware. And when it happened, Taiwan's foreign minister was speaking to the press. He was forced to stop. Take a look at this.
Thank you. The gentleman in the middle, in my shirt with you.
She saw Taiwanese face.
Oh, that's okay. The PRC has fired a satellite in this region.
It wasn't a missile, thankfully. China had launched a military satellite earlier today, and that satellite set off the warning systems in Taiwan. For the first time ever, Taiwan's government issued a nationwide alert today. The satellite was launched from Sichuan in China. It flew over the island of Taiwan, and Taipei has good reasons to be concerned. They did not know about the launch. As far as they were concerned, it could have been an attack.
Carried by a rocket flew over Taiwan and debris might fall, and therefore there was a national alert being issued.
That's Joseph Wu, the foreign minister. He believes today's events fit a pattern. China is bullying Taiwan ahead of the election, and this launch was supposed to give them a foretaste of what could follow, to remind them of the looming threat of war, a war between China and Taiwan, because Xi Jinping has not ruled out the use of force. He's been carrying out what is called psy-ops, pulling off stunts that are meant to scare. Last week, they used balloons. Taiwan spotted many of them, and it believes that China sent the balloons to harass them.
It is a grey zone harassment tactic, and we have reported the incidents to the Aviation Authority. This is China's attempt to use cognitive warfare to affect the morale of our people.
So China's goals are quite clear. It wants to influence the presidential election to install a pro-Beijing leader as Taiwan's president. And to do this, China is deploying all kinds of tactics. It is resorting to economic coercion. Last month, Taiwanese exporters were punished. China ended tariff concessions on chemical imports. Basically, they're targeting Taiwan's business elite. They depend on the Chinese mainland for orders, and now they face curbs and restrictions. It's a classic pressure tactic to pull votes. Then there are claims of espionage. Taiwan has been cracking down on Chinese spies. In 2023, at least 16 people faced these charges. They were accused of living in Taiwan and spying for China. Beijing also runs a massive misinformation campaign designed to influence voters. China is said to be planting fake stories and pushing conspiracy theories, and one of them was about the US. It said Taiwan and the US are building biolabs to target Chinese people. Fake news. Negative news from Taiwan has been amplified, like news about egg shortages or political scandals or Taiwan's readiness for war. China has been pushing them on the internet. The idea is to polarize voters, to make them think that there is a crisis, to hype up perceived threats, and to make the pro-democracy leaders look bad, because it's said to be happening under their watch. Taipei has warned its people about this election misinformation. They've been asked to watch out for claims like surveillance inside polling booths and hidden ballot boxes. They're on their guard. Voting takes place on the 13th of January, this Saturday. Taiwan fears that China will try to disrupt it. It is weaponizing trade, deploying spies and spreading fake news, all of it to stop this man, Lai Ching-te, the vice president of Taiwan and the current frontrunner.
China has intervened in every major Taiwanese election, but this time it is the most severe. In addition to military threats and intimidation, economic measures, cognitive warfare, and false information, and the use of threats and inducements, it can be said that they are leaving no stone unturned.
Of course, China denies all of this, but the world can see the balloons and the rockets, and so can the people of Taiwan. As they vote for their next president, they're also sending a message to Beijing. From one dangerous sea to another, the Red Sea. It's been a Houthi minefield since November. Multiple ships have been attacked. Many companies have been forced to take another route, and shipping costs are rising. Now the Houthis claim to be targeting Israel. But others are facing the threat too, like India, for example. Most of India's trade passes with Europe, passes via the Red Sea. And that could take a hit. Reports say India's exports could fall by $30 billion. That's $30 billion in the current financial year. It works out to a 7% drop. A major reason for that is shipping costs. Usually sailing from India to Europe takes $500 to $600. That's the cost per freight. Now it's almost $2,000. If you add war risk insurance, it's almost $3,000. So exporters have two options: either absorb the rise rather, and risk a loss, or add it to their selling cost. But whatever they choose, it's bad news for them. So India is concerned about the situation. It has deployed a lot of hardware in the region. This is what India has: 10 warships, surveillance planes, additional drones, and more marine commandos. They've been busy since December. Just last week, the Navy carried out a major operation. It thwarted a hijacking attempt near Somalia. But the trouble is not over. India is now escorting commercial ships in the region. Basically, warships will sail with cargo ships, sort of like a bodyguard. It tells you how serious the situation is. And what about the US-led coalition? Well, no one's interested, it seems. Most US allies are reluctant to deploy ships. Plus, the Houthis won't stop. Last month, the Americans sank a Houthi vessel. 10 of their fighters were killed. Look at how the Houthis commemorated them.
النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم حين عول عليكم أيها الشعب اليمن
America will bear the consequences and results of what it has done. And we say that we don't fear anything America does.
It was a sea of people, as you can see. Tens of thousands gathered in Sana'a. They chanted slogans against America. What does that tell you? It's a popular campaign for the Houthis. Attacking these ships gives them political mileage. So why would they stop? Of course, Israel is not bothered. They continue to wage war on Gaza. It's other countries in Asia who are affected. For example, Singapore has joined the US-led coalition. It is sending soldiers to the Red Sea. So is Sri Lanka. Their major exports have been hit by the conflict, so Colombo is sending a warship. Even Pakistan has joined in. Their warships are patrolling the Arabian Sea. Now, Islamabad has not blamed the Houthis, but their concern is quite clear: keeping the sea lanes safe. The biggest responsibility lies with India. New Delhi is the net security provider in the region, also the first responder in the Arabian Sea. So naturally, our deployments are more. But what about the rest of the world? The Red Sea carries around 12% of global trade. So surely it's everyone's job, not just one or two countries. But the attitude right now is your exports, your problem. Even China is half-hearted. Its largest shipping firm has stopped using the Red Sea. Some exporters are now using trains. Goods are being taken overland to Central Asia and Europe. Of course, this is not a long-term solution. It's more expensive and time-consuming. To safeguard the Red Sea, there are just two options. One, a much larger force. You can't have half-hearted participation. Or two, end the war in Gaza. Ask Israel to stop the offensive. But Washington is not interested. They've talked about limiting the offensive. They've talked about protecting civilians, but they won't call for a ceasefire. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in West Asia. He still thinks that threats will work.
We've had 40 countries come together to make clear that what the Houthis are doing has to stop. And we have other countries that have made clear that if it continues, there have to be consequences. So our strong view, our strong preference is that the Houthis get the message that they're receiving from countries around the world that this needs to stop.
Well, news flash, they won't. The Houthis are now heroes in the Muslim world. They're being celebrated on the streets, so threats will not stop them. It's time the US and its allies realize that. Our next story is from France, where President Macron has reshuffled his cabinet. He has picked a new prime minister. His name is Gabriel Attal. He's the youngest ever prime minister, also the country's first PM who's openly gay. Before today's announcement, he was serving as the education minister of France. But why was this shake-up necessary? Because President Macron is facing a crisis of relevance. His popularity has dipped. His government has suffered a series of setbacks. They've seriously damaged Macron's credibility. So this appointment is an attempt at political reinvention. President Macron wants to be relevant again. Can his new Prime Minister help him? Our next report explores.
Gabriel Attal reminds a lot of French lawmakers of Emmanuel Macron. He's young, someone who didn't have the perfect CV, but climbed through the political ladder in record time. Attal's presence will infuse a new energy in Macron's cabinet. He's the youngest Prime Minister of France, also the first openly gay leader of government, and a popular face within the Macron government. The credentials are certainly eye-catching, but they don't guarantee success in this job. Attal will step into a challenging political landscape. He faces a fractured lower house. His leadership will be tested by a rising far right. But his biggest problem stems from the president himself. Macron is no longer the most popular leader in France. Marine Le Pen, the face of the French far right, has gotten ahead. And she's not just winning the popularity contest. Le Pen is gaining influence in the French parliament too. Last month, she checkmated Macron. The French government had introduced a bill. It would have reset the immigration rules and speed up hearings on asylum cases. The government also wanted greater powers to expel immigrants. The bill would have enabled that, but it was defeated in Parliament thanks to Le Pen's efforts. She engineered a coalition of opposition parties. The lawmakers didn't even debate the bill. The proposed law was rejected. The bill was passed a few days later, but Macron had to accept a compromise and adopt harsher immigration policies. The new version of the bill introduced migration quotas and delayed access to welfare benefits for migrants. It was a bill that Macron didn't want, but he was forced to accept it.
This text which is coming out is the fruit of this compromise. Is this the government's text? No.
The one you wanted?
No, obviously not. There are things in the law that I'm not going to tell you I'm thrilled about, that I find great.
Macron's biggest weakness was laid bare by that exchange. He doesn't command a majority in parliament, and he's steadily losing supporters. Since being re-elected in 2022, Macron has struggled to govern and stumbled from one crisis to the next. His ambitious pension reform was met with a strong backlash. On the world stage, Macron has tried to lead Europe, but he ended up inviting more criticism for his suggestions. The French president also suffered humiliation in Africa. Last year, his military was asked to leave Niger. Niger is a former French colony and served as a linchpin for French influence in the region. But Niger's new military junta ended that. They're getting closer to Russia now. Macron's agenda has been derailed. Gabriel Attal has been tasked with putting the government back on track. But as he takes on a bigger role in government, he will be confronted with Macron's limitations.
Another day, another election, this time high up in the kingdom of Bhutan. It's easy to miss this country. After all, they have very big neighbors. India and China put together, that's almost 3 billion people. And between them is Bhutan, home to just 8,000 people. Around half of them are eligible to vote. Today, they trickled into polling stations to elect their new government. But why is this election important? Well, a contested border is at stake here, but we'll get to that later. First, let's meet the hopefuls. On one side is Bhutan Tendril Party. On the other is the People's Democratic Party. Bhutan's media says the PDP has won. That's the party of Shering Tobgay. He was Prime Minister from 2013 to 2018. The incumbent was not even in the picture. They were booted out in a pre-election, which brings us to Bhutan's biggest challenge, jobs. Bhutan doesn't have jobs. Youth unemployment is at 29%, meaning almost 1 in 3 youngsters is jobless. So what do? Most of them are trying to migrate, and Australia is a popular destination. From 2022 to 2023, almost 12,000 Bhutanese moved to Australia, 12,000, which may not sound like a big number, but in Bhutan, it's 1.5% of their population. That's a rapid brain drain. And why is it happening? Well, Bhutan is not an industrialized country. Average GDP growth is just 1.7%. Most of the money comes from 2 places, tourism and hydroelectricity. But both are limited. Tourism is just 1/3 of pre-pandemic levels, and hydropower is underexploited. It's at 10% of Bhutan's total capacity. So young voters want a major change.
Regarding the country's economy, during the past few years, I think there has been a major setback in our revenue as the pandemic has affected the lives of the people.
I hope they involve youths in the Gyeongsu City project, and I also hope they take action on this mass migration into other countries.
It's like a reality check for Bhutan. In 2008, the country introduced an interesting concept. You may have heard of it. Gross National Happiness, or GNP. Bhutan does not measure its GDP growth. Instead, it looks at happiness. Now, I know the obvious question. How do you even measure someone's happiness? Well, Bhutan has a method. They measure performance across 9 domains. For example, health is a domain. So is education, living standards, environment, and emotional well-being. That's how they measure happiness. Bhutan surveys 10% of the population. Based on their responses, the GNP is calculated. If it's 0, people are really unhappy. If it's 1, then they're perfectly fine. But the question is, has this strategy failed? Looking at the unemployment and brain drain, yes, it looks like it has failed. But for the record, Bhutan is not abandoning the concept. Both political parties are committed to gross national happiness. But I'm afraid changes are needed, because in the traditional sense, Bhutan is not really happy. Just look at the World Happiness Index. It places Bhutan at number 97. 97 out of 150 countries, that's where Bhutan is. Finland is number 1, Denmark is at number 2. So what's the takeaway? Low standards are not the key to happiness, because some things are universal, like having a well-paying job, or good infrastructure, or better connectivity. People need that. That's what the Bhutanese want too. And what about their foreign policy? None of the parties has proposed anything radical. Bhutan's top ally has always been India, and that is not expected to change. But there is a border to sort out. You see, China and Bhutan have not settled their border, just like India and China. But last year, some progress was made. Some unexpected progress was made. Bhutan's foreign minister visited China in October. He agreed to settle the border soon. But India will be worried about this, especially about the Doklam Tri-Junction. It's an area that borders China and Bhutan, this Tri-Junction. If China gets access to it, they will be closer to Indian territory. They can rush in troops and machinery. They can cut off India's access to the northeast, which is why New Delhi is worried. Now, after October, things have been quiet. We've not really heard anything from Bhutan or China. I guess the new government will decide and take this forward. So rest assured, both New Delhi and Beijing will be watching. And frankly, it's a sight to behold. The Bhutanese take great pains to cast their vote. They trek through mountains. Some cross rivers. That's how invested they are. Even the campaigns are special. You won't see random posters or campaign placards. There's a public notice board in towns, and that's the only place you can stick posters. Plus, it's all very quick. Voting was today. The media has already announced the winner, and the official confirmation will come tomorrow. In many ways, that really sums up life in Bhutan. It's simple and sorted.
Yeah, so Boeing stock is down significantly today, driven by the fact that a panel from a 737 MAX 9 blew out unexpectedly mid-flight. So that just obviously has both consumers and investors scared and worried about the future of the company. Boeing shares will probably struggle here for a little bit, as like you said, investors are worried. There's just an emotional reaction even to owning a stock with negative sentiment like this. So we do think it's going to be choppy. There'll be more volatility for the stock, but as they do investigations and we really understand what went wrong here, we think, like I said, this will be a one-time event, which ultimately will help just the stock rebound, as we learned that this really isn't a Boeing mass issue. This is quite a bit different than the two crashes that we had with the earlier 737 Maxes, because those were a technological software issue. This is just a mechanical issue within the fuselage. And like I said, from all evidence so far, this is a one-time event. So I think these are quite a bit different. Obviously, the fact this wasn't deadly either helps with that cause. But we see this as just a mechanical breakdown of a part within that fuselage, and not a mass issue across the 737 MAX 9s. Due to the fact that we see this as just a one-time event, and a lot of the dip in the stock is just on fear, that's usually the best time to get into a stock, because it has become oversold. So we see this as a short-term drop in the stock and a buying opportunity as we begin to get more information that will help the stock rebound. Right now, Boeing is going to be in a little bit of a damage control situation. They'll obviously make press releases, and they'll try to articulate the fact that this was just a one-time event and what they will do going forward to help keep this from happening again. But once again, this will happen. These are not perfect machines. Things can go wrong. So I think as long as they take responsibility and try to look forward what they're going to do next, I think that would just overall just kind of help the sentiment around the stock.
Now let's look at South America, at the country of Ecuador. It's a nation of about 17 million people, and it's caught in a cycle of violence. Ecuador has declared a state of emergency. The first one under the current president, President Daniel Noboa. Under his predecessor, emergencies were routine, but this is the first one since Noboa took office. He won the presidency last November. He promised to bring an end to Ecuador's crime wave. But it looks like he's trying the same old tactics, deploying the army to fight crime. He wants to use Ecuador's army to bring criminal gangs to heel, especially the ones who've taken over the country's prison system. The 36-year-old president made this announcement yesterday on Instagram.
Ecuadorians, the time when the people condemned of narco-traffic, murder and organized crime dictated over the government in place has already finished. What we see in the country's prisons is the result of our decision to confront them. This is why, from the government, we've started to act to recover control of the prisons, which has been lost in the last years. In response, these narco-terrorist groups intend to threaten us and believe that we will concede their demands.
He says Ecuador's prisons have been lost in recent years, which is almost an understatement. These were scenes from one of the prisons yesterday. Inmates had taken over. They were casually relaxing on the prison roof. While security forces watched from the ground, the prison guards had been taken hostage. They were being held inside. It's a damning indictment of the state of Ecuador's prisons. So is the news that likely triggered this emergency. A dreaded gang leader has gone missing. His full name is Jose Adolfo Macias Villamar, but he is better known by his nickname Fito. He leads one of Ecuador's most powerful gangs called Los Choneros. It's a drug cartel, which also dabbles in murder, assassination, extortion and other crimes. Now, Fito has been running it since 2020 from within a prison. He was sentenced to 34 years in jail in the year 2011, but that did not stop him from taking up the gang's leadership. In fact, being in jail did not stop him from doing a lot of things. He was known to feature in music videos shot within the prison compound, which glorified the drug lord's criminal exploits. As I said, Ecuador's prisons have been lost. They're now playgrounds for gangsters like Fito. But the new president wanted to shake things up. There were reports that Fito was going to be moved last Sunday, not too far, just to a high security area within the same prison compound where he was operating. It may not sound like much, but apparently Fito still did not want to move. So he seems to have escaped instead. 2 prison guards have been accused of helping him flee. They're now under investigation, and thousands of police and military officials have been deployed all over Ecuador, both to hunt Fito down and to maintain order at prisons all over the country. Because gang members are causing problems in at least 6 prisons. And they're creating chaos outside as well. 4 police officials were kidnapped last night. This is after the emergency was declared. Vehicles have been torched, explosives are being thrown about. Basically a breakdown of law and order in Ecuador. And some of this may be to distract the security forces to keep them occupied while Fito escapes. And he's done it before. Escaped from prison. He did it in 2013, so he knows the tricks to evade the police. It took them 4 months to catch him the last time. He was apparently found at his mother's house. Now another manhunt is on, and the new president has his task cut out. Ecuador's criminal gangs are entrenched. A 60-day state of emergency is not going to uproot them. The president needs a new strategy, or Ecuador's gangs will continue to run riot. Moving to Germany, if you read the headlines there today, you might think that you're in the wrong century. The tabloids are saying that the emperor is dead and farmers are angry and have taken to the streets. Upon closer inspection, you'll realize you haven't really gone back in time. The fallen emperor is a football legend, Franz Beckenbauer. He passed away on Sunday at the age of 78. And the farmers are protesting for very modern reasons. They're fighting to protect their access to government subsidies, diesel subsidies. They've taken to the streets in their tractors, and they're blocking roads in Berlin and other major cities in Germany. Our Indian audience will be familiar with some of these scenes. Here's our report.
Long rows of tractors are lining up in major German cities. They're in the heart of the capital, Berlin, near the iconic Brandenburg Gate. They have surrounded other major cities as well. Munich, Bonn, Cologne. The tractors are everywhere. It's not just tractors, there are trucks and other farm vehicles as well. And inside them all are German farmers, honking their horns and fighting for their rights. They are protesting. And they will continue to do so all week, with the grand finale taking place next Monday. The German farmers are braving sub-zero temperatures. They are blockading major roads leading into cities. There's almost sort of a festive atmosphere. All this will seem familiar to people in India, including their banners. India had seen its own massive farmers' movement a few years ago. The German farmers are angry over subsidy cuts.
We as farmers had to endure a lot of cuts of all kinds in recent years. We were handed orders and regulations, and the announced cut for the agricultural diesel was the tipping point. The overall resentment finally broke into the open and ended up with this demonstration here.
Germany has subsidized diesel for agricultural use. Farmers effectively pay half the normal rate. Last month, the government decided to scrap that subsidy. It wasn't a voluntary move, it was made under duress. Berlin had been planning to fund the subsidies with money set aside for the COVID pandemic. But a German constitutional court said that would not be allowed. And so the government was left scrambling to cut spending. Germany has racked up an $18 billion budget deficit because of the court ruling, and it needs to plug in that gap. So farmers were among the groups targeted. The entire diesel subsidy was to be scrapped in one go. And tax breaks on agricultural vehicles were to end as well. But this plan was met with outrage. The German farmers weren't having it, and so the government was forced to back down. It decided to leave the vehicle tax breaks alone, and the diesel subsidy will now be removed gradually, completely ending in 2026. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says that this is the best deal on the table.
And that's why, in view of the fact that the government has made concessions to farmers, I think it's also important to keep things in proportion and to strike the right balance.
But the farmers don't want to compromise. It's no longer just about taxes, but about the viability of farming as a whole.
The occasion was, of course, the debate on diesel and vehicle taxes. But that was just the icing on the cake, on top of all the constraints that we have increasingly faced. That's why we are here today. We absolutely need an agricultural policy that is committed to fair conditions for family farms in Germany.
Will the German government listen? Will it give in to the pressure? Or will it opt for a headlong confrontation with the farmers? We'll find out in the weeks to come.
The United States has a new problem. And no, it's not another war, but a mysterious hospitalization of its defense secretary. Lloyd Austin was hospitalized on the 1st of January. He was in the ICU for 4 days, but no one knew, not even the President of the United States. The Pentagon chief has now come clean, but the Congress is asking why the delay, especially at a time when the US is fending off Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. Why did Austin keep his hospitalization a secret? And why is health such a hush-hush affair for world leaders? Our next report tells you.
On December 22nd, the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was hospitalized. It was an elective medical procedure. Austin was back home the next day. But on January 1st, he had to be rushed to the hospital again. He was in severe pain. He spent 4 nights in the ICU. Till 6th January, he was still hospitalized. But no one knew. Not the President, not the State Department, not Pentagon leaders. And that's led to a huge uproar in the US. Austin was hospitalized on the 1st of January. It was only on the 4th that the news reached the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. That afternoon, he conveyed it to Joe Biden. On the 6th evening, the US President spoke to Austin. But why was no one informed earlier? A US President is the Commander-in-Chief of the US military. But linking him and that military is the Defense Secretary. Austin's duties require him to be ready at a moment's notice, especially to respond to any national security crisis. Not quite possible from a bed in the ICU. Austin's hospitalization also came at a crucial time. American destroyers are in the Red Sea, fending off Houthi attacks. Only days ago, a US strike killed a pro-Iran commander in Baghdad. Through all of this, Austin has been hospitalized, and no one knows when he will be discharged. Austin is yet to provide any details about his condition, but he did comment on the fiasco, taking responsibility for the lack of communication. Austin said, and I quote, "I also understand the media concerns about transparency, and I recognize I could have done a better job ensuring the public was appropriately informed. I commit to doing better." But what explains this secrecy? Diseases and hospitalizations are a sensitive affair when it comes to world leaders and officials. That's because there's so much at stake, and most of them like to keep things under wraps, like Russian President Vladimir Putin or North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. There have been lots of speculations about their health, of Putin having a cardiac arrest, of Kim disappearing for weeks at a time. But their countries insist the leaders are hale and hearty. Then there are others like Hillary Clinton. In 2016, she was up against Donald Trump. She had pneumonia. She was advised to rest, but she kept campaigning. It was a secret till she nearly collapsed. Why? So that Trump could not exploit it for campaigning. In 2010, UK Prime Minister Tony Blair was hospitalized, but number 10 played it down. Turned out he had a heart flutter. Former German Chancellor Angela Merkel has had many shaking spells. She once had to sit down during a national anthem, but she continued to brush off concerns, just like Britain's wartime leader. Winston Churchill had bouts of depression. He had a heart attack, and even a stroke, but no one knew. Same for John F. Kennedy. He was the young, charismatic president that America loved, but in reality, he suffered from Addison's disease and was taking pills for it at the time. Most of us don't like to talk about our illnesses. It's personal. But for public figures, it isn't that simple. Can leaders too cite personal privacy? Or does the public have a right to know? Well, the jury is still out.
The human race has come so far. We've landed on the moon, reached the sun, explored black holes. We've unlocked secrets of outer space. But when it comes to our own Earth, there's little that we know, especially about our oceans. 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water and 80% of it is unexplored. Oceans regulate our oxygen, they influence our climate, and they have a treasure trove down there. Not of gold coins left behind by pirates, but of precious metals and minerals. But can you mine them? One country has decided to, and that's Norway. They have a new plan, a controversial one, to mine the seabed, extract minerals from it. The process is called deep sea mining, and Norway will be the first country to do it. The proposal is quite simple. Let me show you a map. The area that you see in red, this is what Norway will open up for mining. 280,000 square kilometers of national waters. Companies will submit proposals, they will be evaluated, the parliament will examine them, and if approved, they can mine there. Sounds pretty straightforward, except that it isn't. It's controversial and divisive. And to understand why, let's look at what deep sea mining really is. The sea floor is covered with rocks, roughly the size of potatoes. These rocks are called polymetallic nodules. They take millions of years to form. They contain metals like manganese, copper, nickel, cobalt, and other minerals. They can be used to make mobile phones, electronic devices, wind turbines, solar panels, and batteries for electric vehicles. And all of these are in demand. And in the coming years, that demand will only rise because climate change is looming, the world wants clean energy, there's a push to transition, and these metals can power that transition. In fact, by 2040, demand for these metals is expected to double. So we need them. We know where we can find them, which begs the question, why haven't we extracted them yet? Because the process is not as easy as it sounds. The first challenge is technology. You need underwater dredging machines or robot-like vehicles. They'll have to be sent down to the ocean floor, some 5,000 meters below the surface. They will then drive on the ocean floor, swallow the nodules, bring them up to a ship on the surface. It's going to cost a lot of money. And governments alone may not be able to do it, which is why Norway wants to open it for private companies. The other challenge is environmental damage. Like I said, these nodules take millions of years to form. We know they exist, but we know virtually nothing about their ecological importance. Removing them could have repercussions. Plus, the ocean bed is biologically diverse. It has thousands of species, many that we don't even know of. Mining there could cause irreversible damage. The seabed could be affected, marine life will be affected, which means we need some guardrails. What do the rules say? Any country can allow deep sea mining in its waters, which is what Norway plans to do. Japan and Jamaica want to do the same, but only in their waters. International waters are governed by a global body. It's called the ISA, the International Seabed Authority. In July last year, the ISA missed a deadline. It wanted to set up rules for deep sea mining, but those negotiations stalled. This year, they plan to meet again. More than 30 countries want a ban on deep sea mining, but some countries like China are in favor. They say deep sea mining is necessary, especially in the transition to clean energy. And this debate may be never ending. Deep sea mining has its benefits, yes, but it cannot be allowed without knowing the consequences. Mining on land is doing enough damage, irreversible damage. We cannot extend it to the ocean bed without knowing what it could lead to. Have you ever visited a library? Walked through its hallowed halls as the cavern of books openly welcomes you, becomes your sanctuary of solitude and transports you into the mind of another. When was the last time you did that? Saw the inside of a library, when was the last time? There's a good chance it's been a while because you are only part of the norm. Public libraries seem to have become obsolete. Prominent critics think so, and they point to the following numbers. There are about 3 million libraries in the world, which may sound like a lot, 3 million, but it's nothing compared to what it was a few years ago. Just look at the UK. Almost a fifth of its libraries have closed over the past decade, 1/5. In 2005, 335 million people visited libraries in the UK. By 2020, there was a decline of over 100 million. Same with the US. In the last 2 decades, library visits have slumped by 31%. Many have been closed. And these are countries where libraries are grand places. Elsewhere, the situation is even worse. Like in South Africa, it faces a reading crisis. 78% children cannot read in any language. Neither can 12% of the adults. In the last 5 years, 60 libraries have closed. And this is a global story, really. So why are libraries in trouble across the world? For several reasons. For starters, public libraries are underfunded. They don't have the money. American libraries face catastrophic budget cuts. In the last decade, the UK has seen a 30% decline in spending, but budget cuts or not, libraries are starved for resources. Like here in India, it has one of the highest number of libraries in Asia. There is one library for every 30,000 people in India, which is good news, but the disparity is stark. The state of Madhya Pradesh has only 42 public libraries, while Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh have many more. Tamil Nadu and Kerala and West Bengal have even more. But if you dig deeper, you'll find more trouble. Out of every 10 libraries, 6 are non-functional in West Bengal. So they aren't closed on paper, but they aren't really serving any real purpose either, which is saddening because libraries are still a big deal in India. They're a temple for students who need books to prepare for exams. And digitization has changed a lot of this. Public libraries are no longer sacred to knowledge. Their uniqueness is gone. Their walls have been blasted open. There are blogs, online libraries, newsletters, e-books, articles. So why go to a public physical library, sit in an uncomfortable chair and hunt for one piece of information? Why would people do that? Which is why libraries are dying, and nostalgia is not enough to save them. Perhaps they need a makeover. And Singapore is a case in point. 78% of Singaporean residents visit libraries. And I'll tell you why. Singapore's libraries of today look nothing like they did decades ago. Today they have calm pods for patrons to soothe, 3D robotics initiatives, meeting booths, aquariums for children, and storytelling workshops. These moves have attracted young patrons and cultivated a love for learning. So my point is quite simple. No other institution can do what libraries do. They provide open access to knowledge. They can build a better society. So they are worth saving. But like everything else in the world, they must evolve too, meet the world halfway. So they feel a sense of ease and comfort, the people who go there. Because the USP of libraries is gone, they no longer have monopoly on knowledge. The internet has robbed them of it. But it cannot replace their sense of place and joy. It is time libraries put that to use and help us help them.
I think you do have to look at the suppliers. Like I said, I mentioned Spirit Aerosystems. They're the ones that provide the fuselage that had the breakdown here. So as you go further down the chain, that will affect, and you probably will see some turnover in the suppliers for Boeing. That's probably where you're going to see the biggest hit, where Boeing is forced to move away from a specific supplier because they're the one that ultimately takes that blame. Anytime you're flying in the air, I can imagine that brings a lot of emotion. So even from people that are on the ground, it makes them more worrisome about their air travel. So that will have an effect short term on just the entire airline industry, without a doubt. But as an investor, I see this as just a short-term issue, which ultimately will lead to the stock rebounding as they kind of figure this out and find solutions to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Shares of Boeing fell 7% in midday trading Monday, though were down more earlier.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The US protesters interrupted President Biden's speech with calls of a ceasefire. In China, the Harbin Ice and Snow Festival returns for the 40th year, and a massive floating waste dump in Bosnia threatens health and tourism. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 2007, Apple CEO Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone. It was Apple's risky move into the mobile phone market. The first iPhone offered a fingertip touchscreen and easy access to the internet. At that time, it was revolutionary, changing the smartphone market forever. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
The truth. There's no light. Without light, there's no path from this darkness.
If you really care about the lives lost here, then you should honor the lives lost and call for a ceasefire in Palestine. Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
That's all right. That's all right. That's all right.
Joining us now is the author of this compelling new book. It's called Anger Management, the Troubled Diplomatic Relationship Between India and Pakistan. It indeed has been a troubled relationship over the last 75 years since the founding of both countries. Ajay Bisaria is former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan. Thank you very much, Mr. Bisaria, for speaking with us. I must say the most compelling part of your book is the final two chapters where you talk about your time in Pakistan. It was quite an eventful time. We had the Pulwama attack and then the Balakot airstrikes and, of course, culminating with the abrogation of Article 370. I want to start off by asking you about the events of February 27th. That was the day of the Balakot airstrikes. There was a very tense atmosphere between Islamabad and New Delhi. When did you first get news about the capture of the Indian Air Force pilot, Wing Commander Abhinandan Varthaman, and what are the conversations that you had in the immediate aftermath of getting that news?
Well, thank you for having me. Initially on February 27th, there was much by way of fog of war. So there wasn't clarity about what exactly was happening, and during the course of the day, there was news that 3 parachutes had dropped in Pakistan with 3 Indian pilots, it was reported, and later reported that there was only 1 and the other 2 were Pakistani, mistaken for Indians. So it was only towards that evening that it became clear that an Indian pilot was missing and in Pakistan custody, and soon confirmed by the videos that were floating on WhatsApp from Pakistan confirming that the pilot Abhinandan was in Pakistani custody. So I think that's where the dynamic of this operation change, that there was a Balakot, there was a retort, but now it was about getting getting the pilot back from Pakistan, who was really a prisoner of war, who should have been treated under the Geneva Protocols.
So, you also detail in the book, so on the evening of the 27th, the night of the 27th, which is a long night, both in Islamabad as well as in New Delhi, you got a call from your Pakistani counterpart seeking a phone call between the leadership in Pakistan and the leadership in India. What did you do when you got that message? And what did you tell the Indian leadership, and what is the message you got back from them?
Well, I did receive that call towards midnight on the 27th. It had already been a long day. I was on the phone all day and in meetings. And at midnight, I get this call from my counterpart, the Pakistani High Commissioner to India, who was then in Islamabad, saying that Prime Minister Imran Khan wanted to speak to Prime Minister Modi. He didn't specify exactly about what. We both possibly guessed it. But I checked up, and I haven't disclosed with whom. I checked up and I got back to them and got back to him and said that, look, our Prime Minister is not available, but if you have any specific message, please feel free to pass it to me. I'll be happy to pass it on to my Prime Minister. I did not get a comeback on that call that night. So that is, we could only guess what the call was about because it didn't actually take place.
But when did you get the sense that, obviously by then we had all known that there was an Indian pilot who was captured. When did you get the sense that the Indian leadership was willing to escalate this if something, God forbid, were to happen to Wing Commander Varthaman?
Well, there were multiple conversations that had started in different capitals and in Delhi with different foreign diplomats making that point to them that India's ask was that the pilot should be returned, else India could escalate the situation. And that message was sent loud and clear across the world, and through multiple channels that I am not necessarily aware of, that message also went in to Pakistan. But what happened later was that Pakistan revealed to foreign diplomats and later to the Indian diplomatic representative, the acting High Commissioner, that it had information about 9 missiles that India had directed towards Pakistan, and it felt this was a dangerous escalation which India should refrain from, and India's position all the time was clear that the pilot should be returned according to international law by a certain deadline, or India would escalate.
Can you just walk us also through the kind of conversations you were having with your colleagues in the MEA, the minister at that time? Because clearly the fact that an Indian pilot was in captivity would have been like a Damocles sword hanging on all your collective heads. Was there any brief that was given to you? What were the conversations that were happening at that time? Because God forbid, if something happened to Wing Commander Varthaman, that would have been, like you said, escalatory, like you detailed in your previous answer. But more than that, would have been mighty embarrassing for the government of the day.
Well, there were conversations taking place at multiple levels, and my brief, of course, was to negotiate with Pakistan and get the pilot back, get him home. And we had a example or a kind of precedent with us, which was the return of another pilot during the 1909 Kargil conflict, Nachiketa, who was returned to India in the course of a few weeks, but not before some grandstanding by Pakistan, wanting to show it to the media and so on. So we had a sort of precedent there, and we had started these negotiations about how to get the pilot back. And there was a lot of conversation going on about also the need to escalate the situation in case Pakistan did not play ball. Because in Pakistan there were some conversations even in the public domain saying they should keep the pilot and negotiate with India or get some of the other benefit out of India.
When did you get the sense that they were likely to release Wing Commander Vartaman? Of course, publicly we all got to know when Imran Khan addressed the Pakistani parliament and he said we're releasing him as a goodwill gesture. But your account seems to give a different picture, that this was no goodwill gesture. This was them releasing Wing Commander Vartaman because they were scared that India would escalate.
Well, we had advance intimation of this possibility from different sources. I don't want to name any, but we were told that this is what Imran Khan would say. He would talk about abjuring terrorism and he would talk about returning the pilot. And that is exactly what we were expecting in that speech. But until that speech happened, we were not sure that Pakistan would in fact make that statement. But we certainly had advance intimation
and between the speech,
the offer would be made in Imran's speech.
And between the speech and the actual transfer, if I can use that phrase, at the Wagah-Atari border, I think there was a good 24 hours maybe between the speech and the actual, him coming home, the wing commander. How were those intervening hours for you and your team?
Well, tense, because, with Pakistan and given the absence of trust, even after that speech, it wasn't clear what would happen. One deadline was missed. He was supposed to be in by 5 p.m. at Wagah-Atari, but it was close to 9 p.m. when he came. So I think the feeling was that until the man is home, he's not home. So we had quite a few tense moments. I was on the phone continuously with our defense minister then, Nirmala Sitharaman, and she was anxious to know exactly what was happening. I was in touch with my team in Islamabad. My air attaché was escorting him, and they were trying to figure out what was happening. So I think it all ended well, but certainly it was a success of India's coercive diplomacy that helped us get that outcome.
I also want to talk about something that you described which happened subsequent to that. I think it was in May or June of 2019, where you said that there was a message that was sent from the highest leadership, the military leadership of Pakistan, about an impending terror attack in Kashmir, which then turned out to be true and the attack got foiled. Did you get the sense that, particularly when General Bajwa was the Chief of Army Staff there, he wanted to mend fences with India, and that he wanted to, not for any altruistic reasons, perhaps for very pragmatic reasons, and perhaps out of compulsion, but he wanted to try and change the course of the relationship? Can you cite some examples if you felt that way?
Well, there were certainly signs. I mean, we didn't want to jump to that conclusion, but there was signs that something was changing, and we were watching those carefully, we were analyzing them, and certainly this move of sharing a piece of intelligence and then escalating it to a political level and calling me up and telling me that this is something that Pakistan is going to do was both a message to India about some change in behavior, but also a message that we read that Pakistan did not want another Pulwama, even by accident, even done by some other terrorist organization. So I think it was a positive sign from our point of view.
And I also do want to talk about the time when, in August of 2019, Article 370 was abrogated. Again, you were immediately called back. I believe you were sent back by Pakistan. What were the nature of the conversations at that time? Were the Pakistanis completely sort of caught out of the blue when Article 370 got abrogated by the Indian Parliament? Can you walk us through the nature of the conversations that you had, particularly with government officials in Pakistan at that time?
Absolutely. I think what I was of course, in Islamabad then, and through August, Pakistan was seeing signs and getting worried that there was a large number of troops in the valley in Jammu and Kashmir. The Amarnath Yatra was being called off, and they thought that there would be something happening, but Pakistan was essentially caught by surprise. It shouldn't have been any intelligent analysis would have told it that this was in the manifesto of the BJP, this move, and therefore it should have been anticipated, but the timing of it was unexpected for Pakistan, and they were repeatedly summoning in the Foreign Office foreign diplomats and Western diplomats and telling them that India is up to something, but they didn't quite know what. And when it actually happened, the Indian Parliament took that decision on the 5th of August. I had some inkling because I had visited India a little earlier. But when it did happen, it caught Pakistan by surprise, and the evidence of that is the way the policymakers scrambled in panic immediately in the aftermath. I think that was an indication that there was
Did they summon you, or were there any conversations that you had with your Pakistani counterparts?
Absolutely. So on the 5th of August, I was summoned, and it happened in an interesting way. The Western ambassadors were summoned, and one of them said, look, why don't you speak to the Indian High Commissioner? He's a nice guy, and he'll pass the message back home. Tell him directly your concerns.
All right, Ajay Bizaria, once again, many congratulations on your new book. It is indeed a fascinating account of the troubled relationship between Islamabad and New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us on CNN News 18.
Grounding of some of the company's best-selling 737 MAX jets by the U.S. aviation regulator. This came after an accident Friday where a cabin panel ripped off an Alaska Airlines jet while in mid-air shortly after takeoff, forcing pilots to return to the airport in Portland, Oregon, where the flight originated. The plane with 171 passengers and 6 crew on board landed safely. Shares of the airline fell in morning trading but were near break-even by midday, while those of Spirit Aerosystems, which makes the plane part in question, were 8% lower at lunchtime, which was better than their performance at the opening bell. The 60-pound part of the fuselage that came off covers an optional exit door. It was recovered on Sunday by a Portland school teacher who found it in his backyard. U.S. National Transportation Safety Board Chair Jennifer Homendy said. The piece will be thoroughly inspected, she said, though investigators won't have the recording of the communication of pilots from the cockpit voice recorder or CVR to review. Currently, regulations only require that device to record the last 2 hours of communication, and it was too late when it was recovered, renewing attention on an industry call for longer in-flight recordings.
There was a lot going on the flight deck and on the plane. It's a very chaotic event. The circuit breaker for the CVR was not pulled. The maintenance team went out to get it, but it was right at about the 2-hour mark, and it was completely overwritten. At 2 hours, it re-records over it, so we have nothing from the CVR.
This incident is just the latest in a series of problems Boeing has had with its MAX jets. Crashes in 2018 and 2019 killed nearly 350 people and led to the MAX's worldwide grounding for 20 months. In this instance, Boeing confirmed Monday it had already taken steps to get the grounded planes back in the air. It has shared instructions with airlines about inspecting the grounded fleet, which is a key requirement of regulators before the planes can resume service.
tadi menemukan salah satu dari dua black box yang terpasang.
Yeah, so Boeing stock is down significantly today, driven by the fact that a panel from a 737 MAX 9 blew out unexpectedly mid-flight. So that just obviously has both consumers and investors scared and worried about the future of the company. Boeing shares will probably struggle here for a little bit, as like you said, investors are worried. There's just an emotional reaction even to owning a stock.
Welcome back. Shifting focus to debate 2, the Bengaluru Civic Authority has decided to use CSR funds or corporate social responsibility funds for the maintenance of 12 roads. This covers about 13 odd kilometers right in the heart of the city. Now, the BBMP says it wants these private companies to maintain the quality of these roads, and in return, the firms will get dedicated space for their branding. Now, these firms will have to fix the footpath interlocks wherever it's necessary. They will also have to paint the cycle lanes, they have to maintain ornamental plants, repair broken drain slabs, replace defunct street lights, and of course beautify the roads. The BBMP will be responsible for asphalting the roads and painting the main carriageway. The Civic Authority has said this is an efficient way to maintain roads along with private players, but the BJP has launched a political attack. They're saying this is gross mismanagement, as corporate cooperation for CSR initiatives should be for things like education, health, not for building roads. That is the job of the government. It has accused the Siddaramaiah government of emptying the state coffers with over-ambitious guarantee schemes, put together all of which will cost the exchequer more than 50,000 crores annually. Civic activists have also questioned the government seeking records of public spending, accusing the city authorities of massive corruption. The big question then remains, is the pursuit of efficiency, or at least seemingly in a private-public partnership. Has the civic management and the authorities responsible for civic management in the IT capital been exposed yet again?
We have only sought some partnership with the corporates with respect to tender sure road. We will anyway take up the maintenance. We have enough and more funds for maintenance of the roads.
Karnataka government under Siddaramaiah and DK Shivakumar has got bankrupt. They do not have any money for even the smallest developmental activity.
We urge the BBMP to fix the systems and processes in place first, fix the accountability in their own organization, and that should take care of itself. There is enough tax money we think that Bangalore is paying.
Problem is that because of all the commissions the contractors are paying, they are making poor roads. Correct thing would be to see that there is no corruption.
All right, so let's go straight across to our face-off tonight. Aishwarya Mahadev, spokesperson of the Congress, is joining us. So Prashant GS is spokesperson of the BJP. Aishwarya Mahadev, nowhere in the country is the whole idea of maintaining roads, maintaining drain slabs, repair of roads, nowhere is it outsourced to corporates or to any other entities. It's the job of the government. It's what people pay taxes for. Why then is the BBMP not doing its basic duty of maintaining roads in the city?
Good evening, Zaka. I want to give you a little bit of context into this, because to spin it as saying, we don't have the money, so we're asking for CSR this way, is something that I do not believe is exactly what the idea is. For example, the Karnataka government under the Deputy Chief Minister has a flagship program where they've asked for 2,500 crores of CSR for education projects where companies don't just give money, but they maintain the schools themselves. This we believe is a dynamic CSR where you are part of the community, you are part of giving back, and we've also seen far better sort of results that way. And for example, and let's make it also very clear, because the BJP has run this entire story of saying we're asking corporates to come and fill in the potholes, a large pothole which was the legacy of the BJP here. We're not. We're asking for the footpaths, as in, for example, in Bangalore, Church Street, Museum Road, tender shore roads that have a lot of community presence, that have a lot of commercial presence, that also become hubs of, let's say, clogging in city traffic if you do not maintain it. We're asking corporate companies to come in, take a part, have the return of being part of the community, and also have
but Aishwarya, isn't that the job of the government? Isn't that the job of the civic corporation? What are people in the city paying taxes for? There are all kinds of local taxes that are collected. That is for building and maintenance and upkeep of roads. If you're going to outsource that function, you talked about, how educational institutions, that's for education and for health. Yes, that is the whole idea behind corporate social responsibility. That's why it's called CSR, not corporate infrastructure responsibility.
Zaka,
infrastructure responsibility is that of the state.
Zaka, we are not outsourcing the primary job of the BBMP, which is to maintain the road and to ensure that it is something that traffic can move on, ensure that there are no potholes. We are talking about the sides, whether it is beautification, whether it is greenery, whether it is the pavements. We believe that this is a novel initiative which will make people also feel far more responsible.
So here is what the corporates have to do, right? They have to maintain footpaths and cycle lanes. They have to maintain drain slabs. If drain slabs are removed, then it's the job of the corporate to fix that drain slab. They have to maintain and fix street lights. Firms will also have to maintain plants and beautify roads. The BBMP's only job would be to asphalt the roads, basically tar the roads, and to paint the carriageways. GS Prashant, this seems like 80% of the job of the BBMP when it comes to maintenance of roads seems to be given to somebody else. The BBMP is saying that, look, this is not our job, and if we can get people to do this job better and for more efficient monies, then why not?
See, the vacuum of leadership in Congress is now to blame, because if they're now justifying this move, saying that it is community participation, people coming forward. This is definitely no community participation. This is blatant diversion of responsibility and accountability on part of the government to say corporate should come and do this. No, you are supposed to do the basic maintenance. If any extra beautification is required, that the corporate should do, which is generally outside their offices or in the lanes nearby to their office. They will also be allotted a branding space, etc., so that it's more of a win-win situation. Now, it's a classic situation wherein they are being, I believe, forced to do this for reasons best known to Congress, and then say that it is a public-private initiative. No, this is nothing but shifting of responsibility to a private corporate authorities to say you do everything, and the chief minister and deputy chief minister who say that brand Bangalore, other things, would go there and stand and click photographs. What sort of a governance is Karnataka government doing it? This is nothing but...
And one of the examples that is being cited, one of the examples, Prashant, that's being cited is that in Electronic City, for example, which is a large part of the IT hub of Bengaluru, the civic corporation does not do all of this maintenance stuff. It's been done by a consortium of corporates who've come together. There is a civic body which is a consortium of all of these corporates, the various IT companies that have big offices there, and they take care of the maintenance. And from whatever I have seen over the last many years, despite large parts of the city getting rained out during monsoon season, Electronic City is one part of the city which never gets flooded out because it's maintained by corporates. Why can't that example be followed in other parts is the question being asked.
No, Zaka, one thing is fine. Why Electronic City came in, how Electronic City started, if they are doing it, fine, but that's a primary responsibility of the government to do it. Just because an action done by the private agencies are far better does not mean government absolves itself of responsibility and say, look, you are doing a better job than what we are supposed to do, and therefore you continue to do the job. How fair is it to expect the corporates to do it when the primary responsibility of government is being diverted? Is it fair? Just because somebody is doing a good job, which is not their primary responsibility, they are doing it more on a voluntary basis as a corporate responsibility measure.
So let me ask Aishwarya Mahadev, the BJP's political contention is also that all of this is happening because basically the coffers, the state coffers are empty. You've made all kinds of promises to the people of Karnataka with these 5 guarantees. The total estimated cost for these 5 guarantees is upwards of 50,000 crores, 52,000 crores. For Griha Lakshmi, 30,000 crores. For Annabhagya, 10,000 crores. For Shakti scheme, 4,000 crores. For Griha Jyoti, 13,000 crores. For Yuva Nidhi, 2,500 crores. If a large part of the state's budget and its revenues have to be earmarked for these 5 guarantees, then how do you expect the government agencies, the civic authorities, the corporation to maintain roads, which is their primary function? This is the political attack on you.
Zaka, first thing, the budget size is much larger than what the guarantees cost us, and the BJP has nothing else to say except these guarantees. But let me tell you that the BJP is very happy sitting in opposition because of a few things. It's very easy for them to come and attack us, but let me tell you the reality of what we inherited, right? January 17th of 2023, there was a heartbreaking report in all the newspapers that said that the BBMP had gone broke, that their treasury or the khazana that they had no money whatsoever. They had approached 3 banks to basically try and mortgage BBMP properties in order to get money. There was loss of accounting. There was over 4,000 crores in a BDA scam. You saw over 6,000 crores owed to all contractors who basically were up in arms, and we inherited a BBMP. I didn't interrupt.
One second, Prashant, once again, I'll come to you. Prashant, once again, I'll come to you.
I didn't interrupt you.
Yeah, let her finish. But Aishwarya, if there are corruption, if there is scams, go after those scams.
Exactly.
You can't just but you can't. That's not what you're. That's not what you're doing. You are outsourcing the job of the BBMP.
Let me answer. Zaka, you cannot conflate a CSR initiative that way. For example, the education is the state's primary responsibility. Why do all states across the country have the highest funding from CSR for education initiatives? Is that a state abdicating responsibility?
No, but that's a social responsibility. That is a social responsibility. Health, education are social responsibilities. Building roads is not a social responsibility.
As Bangalore has grown manifold in the last 2 decades, there have been infrastructure problems. It's not that BJP created it or Congress created, but Congress, when it's come to the power saying that we are going to give good governance, now can't abdicate responsibility to say Everything will be done by the private agencies. And we'll
Aishwarya,
sit back and say,
I'll give you the
we are
final
now-
word. You came in promising that you're going to change the corrupt regime, the 40% Sarkara Commission and all of that, Commission Sarkara and all of that. What you are basically doing, as G.S. Prashant says, is abdicating your responsibility, letting private. So tomorrow the private companies can say, why should we vote for government? Let's vote for corporates, no?
Zaka, I think that is again a point of absurdity of pushing a nominal statement to something so far. But I will conclude by saying this. They spoke about good governance. My government has come in. Not only have we asked for an inquiry and probe into all the 40% commission charges, we've also instituted safeguards to prevent paper leaks from actually harming aspirants, which I believe is a new thing. We believe that the Lokayukta has also acted. We believe the courts also are very active, and good governance is being ensured, so much so that if you go to the ground or even as something as simple as Shakti, you realize that the people also know the work that...
Can you tell our viewers how many potholes the BBMP has fixed in the last 8 months since you've been in power? Please. No, one second, Prashant. I'm asking a question.
They've withdrawn case against DK Shivkumar.
Yeah.
They have withdrawn the consent to CBI.
That's a political matter. I'm talking about a civic matter. Please enumerate for our viewers how many potholes the BBMP has filled in the last 8 months since the Congress came to power.
Saka, I think the number is directly proportional to the number of deaths inversely rather, to the number of deaths that you've seen. The BBMP on a war footing basis has gone on to clear potholes all across the city, and even with the rains that happened, the sort of response that we had was far more in time, was far more to ensure that there's no damage.
We'll leave that judgment to Bangaloreans. I'm not sure what has changed, at least from a civic point of view and from a quality of life point of view in the last 6 months in the city of Bengaluru. But this sort of initiative of trying to get private agencies, private entities, corporates to move some of their social responsibility funds to maintaining roads and street lights and slab drains on roads and footpaths. Well, depending on which point of view you look at it, is it a novel idea or is it just simply outsourcing what is the primary job of a civic authority?
Sentiment like this. So we do think it's going to be choppy. There'll be more volatility for the stock. But as they do investigations and we really understand what went wrong here, we think, like I said, this will be a one-time event, which ultimately will help just the stock rebound as we learned that this really isn't a Boeing mass issue. This is quite a bit different than the two crashes that we had with the earlier 737 Maxes, because those were a technological software issue. This is just a mechanical issue within the fuselage. And like I said, from all evidence so far, this is a one-time event. So I think these are quite a bit different. Obviously, the fact this wasn't deadly either helps with that cause. But we see this as just a mechanical breakdown of a part within that fuselage and not a mass issue across the 737 MAX 9s. Due to the fact that we see this as just a one-time event,